The phone pressed against his ear. Mark listened, his breath held tight. On the other end, barely a whisper, a small voice trembled. It was Lily, his 5-year-old daughter. "Daddy," she breathed, the sound muffled like she was hiding under a blanket. "I need help. My new mommy's friend. He's not nice." The words were like tiny needles, each one finding its mark in Mark's chest. He could hear a shuffling sound, then a low, urgent "zh" from Lily, followed by a slight whimper. Mark's knuckles whitened as he gripped the phone. He heard a door creak, then a man's heavy footsteps. A deep, unfamiliar voice suddenly boomed through the receiver, cutting off Lily's terrified plea. "Who's this?" "Oh, it's just little Lily, playing pretend again. Kids have such wild imaginations, don't they?" The voice was thick, laced with a mocking tone that made Mark's blood run cold. It was the friend. Lily's new mommy, Sarah, his ex-wife, had a new boyfriend, David, and this had to be him. The man chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "She's fine. Just a bit dramatic, like her mother." He paused, and Mark could almost feel the sneer through the phone line. "You know, always making a fuss over nothing. Don't worry, I'm taking good care of her." There was a deliberate, almost theatrical pause. "She's safe with me." Mark didn't say a word. He couldn't. His throat felt like it had closed up, every muscle in his body rigid. But inside, something shifted. The quiet concern that had been gnawing at him for weeks hardened into a cold, unbreakable resolve. He was an ex-Navy SEAL, trained to stay calm under pressure, to assess and react. This was no different. This was his daughter. Beside him, Rex, his loyal German shepherd, let out a low guttural growl. The dog's ears were perked, his eyes fixed on Mark, sensing the sudden change in his master's demeanor. Rex had always been protective of Lily, a gentle giant who seemed to understand more than most humans. He nudged Mark's hand with his wet nose, a silent question. Mark scratched behind Rex's ears, his gaze never leaving the phone. Some monsters, Mark knew, didn't hide under beds. They walked around in plain sight, wearing smiles, putting on a show. But justice, he also knew, always found its way. It might be slow, it might be painful, but it always came. And he was about to become the instrument of that justice. The man on the phone cleared his throat. "Well, I gotta go. Lily's got a big day tomorrow. No time for silly phone calls." He hung up abruptly, a click echoing in Mark's ear. Mark slowly lowered the phone, his eyes fixed on the front door of his quiet suburban home. A silent promise formed in his mind, a vow of swift, decisive action. Before we continue with Mark's story and what happens next, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any updates, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Mark lived in a quiet suburban town in the United States, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and kids rode bikes freely down tree-lined streets. His house, a modest 2-story with a small manicured lawn, was his sanctuary. After leaving the Navy SEALs, the calm routine of civilian life was a stark contrast to the chaos he'd once known, but it was a contrast he cherished, especially for Lily. His days now revolved around her. He'd wake up early, make her favorite pancakes, and then walk her to the local elementary school, Rex trotting faithfully beside them. The neighborhood park was a central part of their lives. It was where Lily spent countless afternoons, her bright laughter mixing with the squeals of other children on the swings and slides. Mark would sit on a bench, watching her, a quiet contentment settling over him. He found peace in these moments, a sense of purpose that military service had never quite provided. His bond with Lily was everything. She was his world, a constant reminder of hope and unconditional love. He'd read her bedtime stories, help her with homework, and patiently explain why the sky was blue or how a caterpillar turned into a butterfly. Every scraped knee, every triumphant drawing, every sleepy hug solidified their connection. This strong, loving relationship with Lily stood in sharp relief against the strained one he had with his ex-wife, Sarah. Their divorce had been messy, filled with arguments and misunderstandings, but they had always tried to put Lily first. Sarah had moved on quickly, finding a new boyfriend, David, who now seemed to be a permanent fixture in Lily's life. Mark tried to be civil, for Lily's sake, but he always felt a prickle of unease around David. Mark carried his own invisible scars from his time in the military. The things he had seen, the choices he had made, sometimes haunted his sleep. His biggest fear now wasn't combat. It was failing Lily, failing to protect her from the world's harshness. He wanted to provide her with a stable, loving environment, a safe haven where she could grow up without fear. That was his dream, his driving force. He'd meticulously planned for her future, saved every penny, and tried to anticipate every need. David, Sarah's new boyfriend, had entered their lives smoothly, almost too smoothly. At first he seemed charming, always ready with a compliment for Sarah, a playful joke for Lily. He was good-looking, articulate, and seemed to genuinely care about Sarah. Mark, despite his reservations, tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. He saw how happy Sarah seemed, and he wanted Lily to have a stable family life, even if it wasn't with him. David was a master at presenting a polished facade. He'd often bring Lily small gifts, nothing extravagant, just enough to seem thoughtful. He'd talk about his successful business, his grand plans, and how much he adored Sarah. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, David started to infiltrate their lives in a way that felt unsettling. He seemed to exploit Sarah's vulnerabilities, her desire for a strong partner, her longing for stability. Mark noticed subtle shifts. Lily, who was usually so outgoing, sometimes seemed quieter around David. Sarah, once fiercely independent, began to rely heavily on David's opinions. Mark's desire for Lily's happiness often made him overlook these small signs, dismissing them as his own lingering jealousy or overprotectiveness. The emotional backdrop of their lives became subtly tense. There was an undercurrent of unease that Mark couldn't quite pinpoint. He'd call Sarah to talk about Lily, and David would often be in the background, making comments that felt off, almost possessive. These small, unsettling moments created a quiet anxiety in Mark. He knew something wasn't right, but he couldn't put his finger on it. It was like a faint, out-of-tune note in an otherwise harmonious song, just enough to make you feel off-kilter. This simmering tension, this quiet sense of dread, was setting the stage for the conflict that was about to erupt. A conflict that would tear apart the fragile peace they had managed to build. The quiet anxiety Mark felt was a slow-growing crack in their foundation, a collection of small moments that chipped away at any trust he might have had in David. These weren't dramatic fights, but insidious little behaviors that, when looked at together, painted a clear picture. David was a master at breaking promises to Lily. He'd suggest a trip to the zoo or a special ice cream outing, making Lily's eyes light up with excitement. Then, at the last minute, something urgent would come up. An important call, a sudden business meeting, a headache. Lily would try to hide her disappointment, but Mark could see it in her slumped shoulders, the way she'd pick at her dinner later. He knew how much those small moments meant to her, and how much those broken promises hurt. While he was letting Lily down, David was always quick to praise Sarah. always with a smooth compliment about her appearance or her intelligence. He made her feel special, important. But then, almost immediately, he would subtly undermine Mark. It would start with a casual remark, disguised as concern. "Mark, are you really sure Lily should be eating that much sugar? You know how hyper she gets." Or, "I heard about your old job, Mark. Tough market out there, huh? Glad I'm in something more stable." These weren't outright insults, but they were carefully placed jabs, designed to make Mark feel less than, especially in front of Sarah. He'd laugh them off, pretending they didn't sting, but they did. They were veiled humiliations, each one a tiny cut. David's manipulation went deeper than just undermining Mark. He slowly started to isolate Sarah from her friends and family. He'd complain about her friends, saying they were negative influences or always causing drama. He'd make plans for just the two of them, often on nights Sarah usually spent with her sister or her old college friends. Sarah, caught up in the romance and attention, didn't seem to notice. She became more and more reliant on David, her world shrinking to just the two of them. Mark saw it happening, but every time he tried to bring it up, Sarah would get defensive, accusing him of being jealous or trying to ruin her happiness. She'd always say, "You just don't want me to be happy, Mark." These moments of injustice piled up. Mark would mention Lily seemed a bit quiet around David, or that she'd complained about him being mean about her drawings. Sarah would brush it off, saying, "Oh, Lily's just being dramatic. She misses you, that's all." Or, "David's just trying to teach her discipline. You spoil her too much." It was always Mark's fault, always his jealousy. He felt like he was screaming into a void, his concerns dismissed, his instincts ignored. Lily's subtle discomfort, which Mark noticed with the keen eye of a loving father, was always explained away by Sarah. He wished she could see what he saw, feel what he felt. The last straw event wasn't just Lily's whispered call. It was the culmination of all these little things. It was the broken promises, the veiled insults, the subtle isolation, and Sarah's constant dismissal of his worries. Lily's small voice, trembling and scared, wasn't an isolated incident. It was the result of prolonged emotional distress, a child's quiet suffering finally bubbling to the surface. It was the sound of a child who had been pushed too far, whose trust had been eroded, and who finally found the courage to ask for help. That muffled call wasn't just a phone conversation. It was the breaking point, the moment everything shifted, and Mark knew he couldn't stand by any longer. The quiet dread had finally found its voice. The emotional atmosphere in Mark's life grew heavy, almost suffocating. It felt unsustainable, like a pressure cooker about to burst. The calm he had tried to build for himself and Lily was constantly under attack, chipped away by the escalating tension between him and Sarah, often fueled by David. Arguments became more frequent, not just between Mark and Sarah, but with David often interjecting, his passive-aggressive remarks like oil on a fire. He wouldn't directly insult Mark during these fights, but he would side with Sarah in a way that made Mark feel ganged up on, or he'd offer solutions that subtly blamed Mark for the tension. "Maybe Mark just needs to accept that things are different now, Sarah," he'd say, with a sympathetic look at Sarah that felt like a punch to Mark. The conflict wasn't just contained within their small circle. Neighbors and mutual acquaintances started to notice the strange dynamics. Hushed whispers followed Mark and Sarah at the grocery store or during school pickups. Judgmental glances were cast their way, especially when David was present, always playing the innocent victim, the calm, reasonable man caught in the middle of a messy divorce. He'd often performative sighs or shake his head sadly when Mark would raise his voice in frustration, making Mark look like the aggressor. People who had once been friendly now kept their distance, unsure of whose side to take, or perhaps simply uncomfortable with the obvious strain. Mark felt the weight of their judgment, a constant dull ache in his chest. He was trying to protect his daughter, but to the outside world he just looked like a bitter ex-husband. David's behavior, meanwhile, continued to worsen. He became more controlling and possessive of Sarah, often calling her repeatedly when she was out, or checking her phone. He'd make comments about what she wore, or who she talked to, and towards Lily, his dismissiveness hardened into something more intimidating. He stopped bothering with the pretense of being a friendly presence. He'd snap at Lily for small things like leaving toys out or making too much noise. Mark heard about it from Lily, who would recount these incidents in a small, scared voice. "David told me to be quiet, Daddy. He said I was annoying. Or, he took my drawing and crumpled it up because he said it was messy." These were not just isolated incidents. They were becoming a pattern. Mark could hear the fear in Lily's voice, a fear that gnawed at his own heart. Mark felt suffocated. The judgment from others, the constant arguments, Sarah's blindness to David's true nature, and now Lily's growing fear. It all pressed down on him. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of helplessness and frustration. Every time he tried to talk to Sarah, to make her see what was happening, she would shut him down. "You're just jealous, Mark. David is good to me. He makes me happy." Her words were like a cold knife, twisting in his gut. How could she not see it? How could she prioritize this man, this increasingly cruel man, over her own daughter's peace of mind? He replayed conversations in his head, searching for the right words, the perfect argument that would finally make her understand. But nothing worked. This was the peak of his emotional struggle. He wrestled with his instincts, his protective nature as a father, against the societal norms of not interfering too much in an ex-spouse's new relationship. He hated the feeling of powerlessness, a feeling he hadn't truly experienced since his days in the SEALs, where he always had a clear objective and a path to achieve it. Here, the path was murky, blocked by Sarah's denial and David's insidious manipulation. He felt isolated, alone in his concerns, even though he knew deep down he was right. The quiet dread that had been a constant companion now roared in his ears. He knew something had to change, but he didn't know how to force that change without making things worse, without alienating Lily even further from her mother. The pressure was immense, a heavy weight on his shoulders, threatening to crush him. He just needed a way, a clear sign, a definitive moment to act. That definitive moment, the turning point he desperately needed, came in a way he hadn't expected. One afternoon, Lily was staying with Mark, and they were drawing together, a simple activity that often brought her comfort. Mark noticed Lily was unusually quiet, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was drawing with intense focus, pressing the crayon hard onto the paper. When she finally finished, she held up the picture for him to see. It was a crude, childlike drawing, but the message was stark. There was a large, angry-looking figure with spiky hair, arms raised, a dark cloud coming out of its mouth, clearly yelling. Next to it was a much smaller figure, Lily, with tears streaming down her face, and a pile of scattered toys on the floor. Below the angry figure, Lily had carefully, painstakingly, written David in wobbly letters. And below her own crying figure, she had written, "Bad David, my toys." Mark felt a cold dread spread through him, colder than anything he'd experienced in combat. This wasn't just a child being upset. This was a depiction of genuine fear and distress. He looked at the drawing, then at Lily's small, worried face. "Lily Bug," he said softly, trying to keep his voice steady. "Did David yell at you like this?" Lily nodded, her lower lip trembling. "And he took your toys?" Another nod, a small sniffle. "He said I was too loud, and my toys were messy. He said he would throw them away if I didn't clean them fast enough." His worst fears were confirmed. David wasn't just dismissive. He was actively terrorizing his daughter, using intimidation and fear. And he was doing it when Sarah wasn't around, or simply turning a blind eye. This wasn't about jealousy anymore. This was about Lily's safety and well-being. The drawing was undeniable evidence, a silent scream from his little girl. In that moment, something shifted inside Mark. The suffocating weight he'd been carrying lifted, replaced by a fierce, burning resolve. He was done waiting. He was done trying to reason. He was done with diplomacy. He would protect his daughter, no matter what it took. David's behavior towards Lily had indeed become increasingly aggressive and isolating. He'd started restricting her phone calls to Mark, making excuses like, "Lily is busy," or "she's sleeping," even when Mark knew she was awake. He'd heard from Lily herself, during the few times she managed to sneak a call, that David would often take her phone away for hours, sometimes days if she misbehaved. He even once told Mark, "Lily needs to learn discipline. You spoil her too much." Mark had bitten his tongue then, but the words had festered. The final straw, the immediate cause for Mark to act, came in the form of that muffled phone call. It wasn't just a random event. It was the culmination of everything. Lily's drawing, her whispered fears, David's controlling actions. It all led to that one desperate plea for help. When he heard Lily's trembling voice, "New mommy's friend is not nice," and then David's mocking, arrogant tone dismissing her, something inside Mark snapped. It was an unexpected opportunity, a direct line to the truth, given to him by Lily herself. The call was a stark, undeniable confirmation that the situation had become critical. Lily was not just unhappy, she was in danger. This wasn't just a child's imagination, as David had so casually dismissed it. This was real, and Mark, with Rex by his side, was going to make sure David understood just how real it was. The cycle of suffering was about to break. Mark ended the call, his hand shaking slightly, but his gaze was steady, fixed on the door. A cold fury settled deep in his gut, pushing aside the fear and doubt that had gnawed at him for months. He had tried to be patient, to be understanding, to give Sarah the benefit of the doubt. He had tried to see David as just a new boyfriend, a part of Lily's new life. But now, all those attempts at civility felt like a betrayal of his own daughter. The drawing, Lily's soft whispers, and now David's brazen dismissal on the phone. It all clicked into place, forming a picture of clear and present danger. He felt an immense emotional turmoil, a storm of protective anger, mixed with a deep, aching guilt that he hadn't acted sooner. He should have listened more closely to Lily's subtle cues, should have trusted his gut feelings about David from the start. But that self-reproach quickly morphed into a surging, focused determination. Lily needed him, and he would not fail her. Rex, sensing the shift in Mark's mood, let out a low growl, his hackles slightly raised. He mirrored Mark's intensity, a silent, furry promise of loyalty. Mark knew he couldn't just storm over there. He needed a plan, something concrete. He immediately called Sarah. Her voice was initially cheerful, then turned defensive as Mark, struggling to keep his voice calm, recounted Lily's phone call and David's behavior. "Mark, you're overreacting," she said, a familiar exasperation in her tone. "David just tries to keep Lily in line. You spoil her." But Mark didn't back down this time. He told her about the drawing, about Lily's terrified whispers, about David restricting calls. He laid out every piece of evidence he had, meticulously, factually. He heard a pause on the other end, a flicker of uncertainty in Sarah's voice. I don't believe it," she finally said. But the conviction wasn't there. He could tell she was starting to question things. The sheer weight of his accusations, backed by specific details, was hard to ignore. He told her he was going to the police, that he wouldn't let this go. That seemed to shake her. The idea of police involvement, of their private lives becoming public, clearly unnerved her. Meanwhile, the small suburban community, usually quick to judge, began to show a different face. Mrs. Henderson, who lived 2 houses down from Sarah and had often exchanged pleasantries with Mark at the park, called him. "Mark, I've seen some things," she admitted, her voice low. "David, he's not good with Lily. I've seen him yell at her in the yard more than once, and she just looks so sad." Other neighbors, who had previously been part of the hushed whispers about Mark's jealousy, now approached him with concern. They had seen David's temper, his coldness towards Lily, his possessive attitude towards Sarah. These secondary characters, once sources of quiet judgment, were now becoming unexpected allies. Some of Sarah's friends, who David had systematically pushed away, also reached out to Mark. They'd seen David's manipulative side, how he isolated Sarah, how he would subtly belittle Mark. Their testimonies, though anecdotal, painted a consistent picture of David's character. The cultural dynamics of their American suburban community, with its strong emphasis on family and child protection, were beginning to work in Mark's favor. People might gossip, but when a child's safety was at stake, the community often banded together. When Mark finally called the police, he didn't just make an accusation. He presented a detailed account, corroborated by Lily's drawing, the neighbor's observations, and his own recorded phone call. The officer listened carefully, taking notes. In the United States, child welfare was a serious matter, and Lily's concerns, even from a 5-year-old, were taken seriously, especially when backed by evidence. They initiated an investigation, promising to visit Sarah's house immediately. Lily, in the hours that followed, was visibly traumatized. When Mark finally picked her up, she clung to him, burying her face in his shoulder, her small body trembling. Rex, ever vigilant, stayed close, nudging her hand with his nose. Mark felt a profound mix of relief that he had finally acted, and a renewed, fierce determination. He would ensure Lily's safety and recovery, no matter the cost. This was just the beginning. The investigation moved quickly. The police, armed with Mark's detailed account, and the supporting statements from neighbors and friends, interviewed Sarah and David. Sarah, confronted with the escalating evidence and the gravity of the situation, finally broke down. The picture Lily drew, the consistent reports of David's aggressive behavior, and the realization of how isolated she had become, forced her to see the truth. She cooperated fully, providing her own testimony about David's controlling nature and his increasing harshness towards Lily. It was a painful awakening for her, but a necessary one. David, on the other hand, tried to deny everything, twisting the facts and attempting to portray himself as the victim of a jealous ex-husband and an imaginative child. But his story crumbled under cross-examination. The police found inconsistencies, and his attempts at charm failed to sway the seasoned detectives. The legal system in the United States, designed to protect its most vulnerable citizens, began to churn. Mark, meanwhile, focused entirely on Lily. He knew the legal process would take time, but his immediate priority was to rebuild her sense of security and trust. They spent countless hours together, just the two of them and Rex. They went to the park, read books, and simply talked. Mark made sure she knew she was safe, loved, and heard. He encouraged her to express her feelings, to draw, to play. He watched her carefully, looking for any signs of lingering fear or anxiety, ready to address them with patience and understanding. Rex, as always, was a constant, comforting presence. His gentle nudges and quiet companionship, a balm for Lily's young heart. The community, once having looked at Mark with subtle judgment, now rallied around him and Lily. Neighbors offered to babysit, brought over meals, and made sure Lily felt welcomed and protected. It was a powerful demonstration of how a community could come together in times of crisis, driven by a shared concern for a child's well-being. Months passed. The legal proceedings against David concluded. Based on Lily's brave testimony, Mark's evidence, Sarah's cooperation, and the overwhelming corroborating accounts, David was convicted. The judge handed down a sentence that reflected the seriousness of his actions, especially his abuse of a child's trust. It wasn't a moment of celebration for Mark, but a profound sense of justice and closure washed over him. Lily was safe. That was all that mattered. Sarah, deeply remorseful and shaken by the entire ordeal, sought counseling. She started to mend her relationship with Mark, acknowledging her mistakes and expressing her gratitude for his unwavering protection of Lily. It was a long road for her, but she was committed to rebuilding trust and becoming a better mother. She also began to rebuild her relationship with Lily, slowly and carefully, allowing the healing process to unfold naturally. Life for Mark, Lily, and Rex slowly returned to a new normal. The scars remained, but they were fading, replaced by renewed strength and a deeper bond. They found peace in their quiet home, a sanctuary of love and understanding. Mark often watched Lily playing in the yard with Rex, her laughter light and free, and a profound sense of gratitude filled him. The story was a stark reminder of the enduring power of a parent's love, a love that would move mountains, face down any adversary, and fight for justice. It underscored the critical importance of listening to children, of truly hearing their whispers and fears, for their small voices often carry the most important truths. And it was a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit, capable of overcoming even the darkest adversities and finding healing, peace, and a renewed sense of hope. Mark, Lily, and Rex were a family, stronger than ever, ready to face whatever came next, together.